He was the voice of a generation and the brawn of an earlier one. With a booming presence and a heart just as large, Gorilla Monsoon was one of the most beloved figures in professional wrestling history. For fans who grew up in the 1980s and early 1990s, Gorilla wasn't just an announcer, he was the announcer. He was the steady voice in the chaos, the moral compass in a world of backstabbing heels and heroic babyfaces. But before he was the voice behind the mic, Gorilla Monsoon was a rough and tough grappler, a towering force who ruled the ring in the 60s and 70s. Born Robert Morella in 1937, the man who would become Gorilla Monsoon started out in amateur wrestling and shot to prominence in the professional circuit thanks to his enormous size, nearly 400 pounds, and surprisingly agile skill set. Nicknamed the Manchurian Giant early in his career, he eventually embraced the persona of Gorilla Monsoon, a snarling, monstrous heel who dominated opponents with brute force and savage intensity. He'd eventually transitioned to beloved color commentator and backstage authority, partnering with the likes of Bobby the Brain Heenan and Jesse the Body Ventura. But don't let the warm chuckles and lighthearted banter fool you. Gorilla Monsoon had seen it all behind the curtain. As an executive in the World Wrestling Federation and right-hand man to Vince McMahon Sr. and later Jr., Monsoon had pull and opinions. He was widely respected, if not feared, in the locker room, not because he was cruel or cutthroat, but because Monsoon didn't play games. He had a no-nonsense approach to business, a soft spot for old-school values, and a distinct intolerance for ego-driven drama. While Monsoon could be patient and mentoring to many, there were a few wrestlers he just couldn't stand working with. Whether it was their attitude, their style, or their complete disregard for locker room etiquette, these men got on Gorilla's bad side, and it showed. Let's pull back the curtain and explore the fascinating, lesser-known side of Gorilla Monsoon, the part of him that could make or break your career, especially if you rubbed him the wrong way. Gorilla Monsoon had the patience of a saint when it came to rookies, but even he had limits, and the Ultimate Warrior tested every one of them. There was no doubt Warrior had the it factor, a chiseled physique, unbridled energy, and a look that screamed main event superstar. Vince McMahon loved him, fans adored him. But backstage, he was a walking tornado of ego, bad timing, and chaos. Monsoon, who by the late 1980s was doing more backstage work and commentary than wrestling, found Warrior's unpredictable nature infuriating. Warrior was notorious for blowing off agent instructions, forgetting spots, and endangering other wrestlers with his reckless in-ring behavior. Worse still, he had no grasp of the unspoken locker room hierarchy, and that didn't sit well with Gorilla. According to former WWE producer Bruce Pritchard, Monsoon once said Warrior wasn't just green, he was neon. Gorilla had little time for wrestlers who didn't respect the craft, and Warrior's meteoric rise, fueled more by charisma than skill, seemed to embody everything Monsoon disliked about the changing industry. Their backstage confrontations weren't exactly explosive, but there was a visible frost in Gorilla's demeanor whenever Warrior was mentioned on commentary. Monsoon would praise his strength, but often mask subtle digs within his classic phrases like, "This guy doesn't have a clue where he is," or "What a miscarriage of justice." Nails was involved in one of the most notorious behind-the-scenes incidents in wrestling history, a real-life assault on Vince McMahon in 1992 over a pay dispute. Gorilla Monsoon, who was not only close to Vince Sr. but fiercely loyal to the company, took the incident personally. Monsoon was reportedly in the building when Nails attacked Vince and had to be physically restrained by other personnel from going after the former prison guard gimmick himself. Monsoon didn't care if Nails felt wronged. He saw the attack as disgraceful and unprofessional. In later interviews, Monsoon would never explicitly mention Nails, but those close to him, including wrestlers like Jim Ross and Pat Patterson, confirmed Monsoon considered him scum and blacklisted him from any future bookings. Gorilla didn't just dislike Nails, he detested him. Once you crossed that kind of line, there was no redemption in Monsoon's eyes. At one point, Monsoon had great respect for Hossein Khosrow Ali Vaziri, better known as the Iron Sheik, a legitimate Olympic-level grappler and gifted heel. Sheik had carved out a special place for himself in the industry. But as the years went on, his erratic behavior, substance issues, and explosive temper wore thin on Gorilla's patience. Monsoon was part of the brass that had to deal with Sheik's erratic no-shows and drunken outbursts in the mid-1980s. There were times Sheik would arrive at events barely coherent, or get into heated arguments with other wrestlers backstage. What really irked Gorilla was the sense that Sheik was throwing away his potential. Monsoon believed in respecting the business and taking care of your opponents. Watching Sheik decline from a world-class heel to a walking liability was, to him, a betrayal of everything they had once stood for. Though never publicly hostile, Monsoon would often refer to Sheik as unpredictable in all the wrong ways during commentary and backstage meetings. Their professional relationship eventually dissolved into a begrudging tolerance at best. This one might come as a surprise. Special Delivery Jones and Gorilla Monsoon were actually friends outside the ring, and their careers overlapped in the 1970s and 80s, but sometimes even a friend can drive you up the wall. SD Jones was a beloved babyface and enhancement talent, known for his bright smile and colorful personality, but Monsoon reportedly grew frustrated with SD's laid-back approach to in-ring psychology and preparation. He wasn't lazy, just inconsistent. Jones had a tendency to ad-lib or veer from planned match structures, which could throw off timing and confuse opponents. Monsoon, who believed in crisp execution and professionalism, often had to clean up the mess on commentary or backstage in production meetings. While it never turned into an open feud, Monsoon once told a young agent, SD never met a spot he couldn't forget. Bad News Brown was a genuine tough guy with Olympic judo credentials and a chip on his shoulder the size of Brooklyn. Monsoon respected Brown's legit background, but their philosophies on the business couldn't have been more different. Brown famously refused to sell for certain wrestlers or do jobs he didn't agree with. He saw pro wrestling less as entertainment and more as a survival contest. That lone wolf attitude made him difficult to book, and difficult for Monsoon to manage. Monsoon believed in putting the show first. Do business, get paid, get out, was the old school mantra. Bad News Brown saw it differently. If he felt he was being disrespected, he'd walk, or worse, he'd shoot. The tension between the two peaked in the late 80s during Brown's short-lived main event push. Gorilla, by then deeply involved in production, reportedly vetoed several storyline pitches involving Brown due to his unwillingness to cooperate with others. He told one producer, "I won't waste airtime on a guy who won't play ball." What's clear in all these stories isn't that Gorilla Monsoon was some grumpy old gatekeeper clinging to the past. It's that he believed in respect. Respect for the business, respect for your fellow workers, respect for the fans. The men who got under his skin most weren't necessarily the worst wrestlers, but the ones who dismissed that code of honor. Monsoon wasn't petty. He didn't hold grudges for no reason. If you came to work, did your job, and cared about the product, Gorilla would have your back. But if you were sloppy, arrogant, or made a mockery of the craft, you'd feel the cold shoulder of one of the most powerful voices in the company. It's worth noting that Monsoon also mentored dozens of stars, many of whom went on to become legends. Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Randy Savage, they all had Monsoon's respect because they respected the business. Even Bobby Heenan, his longtime commentary foil, once said, "Gorilla would rib you, bury you on commentary, and then buy you dinner after the show, if you were one of the boys. But if you weren't, he made it clear." Gorilla Monsoon passed away in 1999, leaving behind a legacy that stretched from the ring to the broadcast booth to the boardroom. His voice is immortal, his presence still felt. But perhaps his greatest legacy lies in the standards he upheld. Wrestling was real to Gorilla, not in the break kayfabe sense, but in the sense that it mattered. The passion, the performance, the professionalism, it mattered. And if you didn't treat it with the same reverence, Gorilla Monsoon would let you know. With just a look, a sigh, or maybe a classic one-liner. Give me a break, will ya? Well, that's all we've got time for today, and a big thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of our future content. See you in the next video.